So to wrap up this epic week, Carolyn and I thought it would be pretty fun for us to play a little quiz game around the top issues that our customers encounter, and then with audience participation, kind of let you guys determine who the winner is here.
And in this corner today, hailing from North Carolina with 25 years of IT experience, is Brian Woodford from our Fast Track team.
And in this corner, hailing out of New York, weighing in at 35 years of IT experience from the team's Troubleshooting, Carolyn Blanding. So let's get ready to troubleshoot.
So Brian, you know the deck is stacked in your favor today.
Why? Why do you say this?
Well, if anybody's watched our sessions, you may have heard this quote from Ben Franklin before. An ounce of prevention is worth
a pound of cure. But you know what? I'll take all the help I can get today.
All right, we'll see how this goes. You ready? You have to keep score. So for our first category of questions is connectivity.
Ooh, you know, so since you think this deck is so stacked, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Uh-oh.
One question coming right up.
Okay.
So for your first question, how can a user tell if they're having connectivity problems in Teams?
Ooh, he's giving me some help. My brain is addled from this week of all this great content, so he's thrown me a softball. And so this is pretty easy. We can tell because we've included some user-facing diagnostics. And the first user-facing diagnostic will show if we detect the client is not connected, we'll tell the user there's no internet connectivity. Please reconnect to keep your conversations going, right? If we try to send a message without the internet, it fails. More importantly, we added a refinement for our users who have external calling capabilities. That's PSTN calling, Public Switch Telephony Network. We will show now that emergency calls are not supported. So that's very important that they should know that their phone won't work for emergency calling if they don't have internet. And finally, if the internet connectivity has been down for several minutes, we'll actually show this unplugged with a refresh button that users can try to reestablish the connectivity with our services.
Right, so what you're saying is our goal is actually to provide actionable user-facing diagnostics. That way we can inform our users of what's actually going on. So we see this in the UFD like when we have Echo now, right?
Yes, I love that Echo. That's very helpful. Who hasn't heard Echo on a call? Have you seen the Echo diagnostic? Cool.
Cool.
Okay, Brian, it's your turn now.
All right.
For prevention, what should administrators do to be sure that their clients can actually maintain connectivity to our services?
So this, I appreciate so much you taking this easy on me, but this is actually kind of a 1-2 punch. So first piece of this, administrators need to ensure that all of the IPs and URLs in the allowed required list are whitelisted. Secondly, we need to also make sure that we're ensuring optimal media quality. So they also need to go in and whitelist the optimized required IPs. The good news is we've made this list a lot better. This used to be a huge pain for our security teams when we reach out to them and say, hey, I need to get all these ports open and all these different URLs. So how many of you are happy that this is such a much shorter list than it used to be?
Thank you. Yeah, and just to call out, the second list, that's for Teams, that's all Teams actually uses, but you should do both because Skype for Business rides on the first list as well as the second.
Second, you got to optimize your media path. Okay, there's a couple pieces to this. So first is configuring QoS, and we'll demo that in just a second. The second piece of this is we want to make sure that we're bypassing VPN. Why? Because it doesn't make sense to double encrypt traffic. One of the things that we've seen a lot is that we use call quality reporting. If we look at the data for VPN, we'll actually see a big difference in media quality for data that's over the VPN versus not over the VPN. The non-VPN traffic will be inherently better in terms of our quality. Last piece of this is you got to use local breakouts. We did a lot of work with teams to make sure that the connections that you have to our high fiber network, you want to utilize those. You want to get to us as quickly as you possibly can. So let's do a quick demo of the QoS piece. All right, so first piece of this, we're going to open up the Teams Admin Center. We're going to go down into Meeting Settings. We're going to slide down to this QoS marker. We're going to flip this to On. Once we click on Save down here, you'll see we actually get a dialog box up at the top that shows us that these settings are saved and applied. The biggest piece about this also is that when we're turning on QoS, we're actually enabling DSCP tagging, okay? The important part about that is now we're actually utilizing that 3479 through 3481 ports for audio, video, and VBSS.
Oh, you nailed that one. All right, game on. Oops, sorry, that's my bad.
So quick recap, for enabling QoS, so you're going to set your DSCP markings. You're also going to use your specific port ranges for audio, video, and desktop share. And lastly, you need to make sure that you're defining the local ports that match your network. So if you're going to change these values around, you've got to make sure that you're doing the due diligence on your network equipment as well.
All right. Is it going to get harder? I see the look.
I mean, maybe.
Okay. I'm ready. Go.
So for your next question, how can administrators investigate connectivity in teams? And what I mean is, what if people didn't follow any of this guidance I just talked about?
That's a good question. You already answered part of that. So our call quality dashboard and analytics, really great tool. If you didn't catch the session yesterday afternoon, that's BRK3204. Please be sure you watch that on stream. There was really great information for how you can use the call quality dashboard for troubleshooting call quality and connectivity. But I want to introduce you quickly to another tool that we have when you're getting set up. You don't have any data, right? How do you test your network? So we actually have a network testing companion that is available for download online. And when you install this client and launch it on a computer, it's the first thing it will do is it'll go out and check to see if the tool needs updating. And then once it's confirmed it's up to date, it'll open up. It checks your operating system. It checks the devices that are connected to the machine. It checks for internet connection. And then finally, it checks the tool itself. There's some settings there that you can go into. You can change some parameters for how many tests you want to run, the duration, and the interval between those tests. And then you just kick the test off. So let's go ahead and kick this test off with a run, a start. And you can see here we got an X, a red X for connectivity issues. So I'm going to drill into the report just by going to the report, view results and click on that report. And now we'll get a detailed report of all of our IPs that we tried to connect to for our media processors and transport relays on port 443 and also our UDP ports. And you see here all of our UDP ports actually failed. Well, I gamed this up a little bit. I blocked those ports on my firewall so I could demonstrate this. So I'm going to clear those ports now and rerun the test. And so we would expect green, which is exactly what happened. But in real world, you could use this to find out if your network team has really opened those ports up that you requested and find out which ones aren't. And maybe they didn't open the whole range, right? So this is a very useful tool, especially when we're getting set up or even possibly to get that network team to pay attention to that request you made. So to recap, we want to use that network testing companion, and we can use that to confirm the devices that are connected to the computers, as well as our internet connectivity and our media connectivity and quality. How'd I do?
Oh, I thought that was going to be a little bit easier.
All right. So, and now it is your turn. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
For prevent, how can administrators, how do they stay informed of all these changes to our Office 365 IPs and URLs so that their clients can be connected?
That's a good question. That's a good question. All right, so customers can use the web service for O365 IPs and URLs. And this can be used for a couple of things. So we have a lot of our network partners that use this on their perimeter devices. So we can reach out there and have those devices stay up to date on their own. We also have the ability to use this to upgrade our PowerShell scripts or maybe even pack files for browsers. And actually, the web service can be used to create notifications. So we can use Power Automate, Azure Apps, and maybe even a custom written notification script so that we can keep this up to date. So raise your hands real quick. Who wants to see that? All right, let's do this. So first piece of this, I created a super simple SPO list in here. So SharePoint Online list, I've got my values in here. And what you're going to see here, we're going to take a look at the data that's behind this. Created a flow, simple flow in here. I'm looking at every hour I want to do a poll. I'm looking at the data that's in my SharePoint list to get a cast of what's in there. I'm also grabbing all of the endpoints from the web. I then got a little bit of JSON script in here that's doing some comparison to find out if everything matches. And then what we do is we walk through and we take a look at this. And if if it doesn't match, then we want to send off a couple of different things. We want to do some updates, and we're also going to shoot off an email, update the list. So let's go back real quick and run this, see what it looks like. So do a quick run here. What you're going to see, we'll switch back over to the list real quick. And now if we do a refresh, now we've got all these endpoints stored in a SharePoint list. Okay? The other cool piece about this is I also dropped myself a quick email so that I know that those changes happened. Makes life a little bit easier to stay up to date on stuff, right?
Well, that's awesome. That's much easier than going out manually looking at that list and manually updating your devices.
Yep, so basically just a quick recap of this. Added a list to a SharePoint site, created a flow comparing our list to the Office 365 web services, and then I can choose to notify. This could have been a Teams notification. We just need email. Then lastly, we're going to update our list of changes.
Excellent.
All right, so before we get to this next round of questions that we're going to tackle, it's helpful to understand where to look for issues if you understand the overall connectivity for services. Teams connects to a lot of different things, right? We've got a lot of connections. So we want to make sure that we understand we have connections that are direct, like to SharePoint for files.
Well, thanks for calling that out, Brian, because that's very helpful. If we understand that the Teams client itself is making a direct connection to SharePoint, then we would probably be wanting to looking at some local data to find out if there's a connection problem. So we could use the Teams client diagnostics. We could use an HTTPS trace. But I want to show you something else that's cool and upcoming in our support center, and that's an ability to run diagnostics from the Office 365 support for issues you may encounter in your tenant with connectivity and access. So let me just show this quick. It's just a tiny demo on this one small capability that we have currently. And there's other scenarios. So right from the Office 365 Support Center, we're going to say I want to open a ticket. We're going to choose the scenario here, external user connecting to SharePoint, and we'll fill in the relevant information and then click Run. And the diagnostic that was returned here in this particular case is that the user who we thought we invited, we in fact didn't invite. SharePoint came back and said, this email address does not exist in your tenant, and an invitation was never sent to the user. This is just an amuse-bouche. There's more coming. There's more other tools out there today, but I just wanted to give you a quick demo of this so you know to go to the Office 365 Support Center and start looking at the diagnostics that are available today and keep your eye out for new ones. So to recap, we can investigate external access issues with SharePoint today through the Office 365 support portal. We can also investigate access to OneDrive, and more diagnostics are coming soon. So for guest access is our next category, our gaming category. This remains a top issue driver for us.
All right, so for the folks in the audience, raise your hand if you've never had a guest access problem. Yeah, that's what I thought.
So we heard that right. Everybody here in the room has had a guest access problem?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm glad we picked this topic.
Yep.
All right, rock and roll. Well, before we continue with our game to determine the winner, we thought we'd break down the difference between guest access and external access. So for guest access, we're actually going to create an Azure AD object within your tenant. And that object will have a security principal identity mapping back to the user's own identity, either in their Office 365 tenant or against their Microsoft account. And this guest access account inside your tenant enables that user to actually join your teams and channels for conversations and collaboration, calling, and meeting joins.
Yeah, and then for external access, it's a little bit different, right? External access, there's no Azure AD account created within the organization. We're allowing one-to-one communication between those users, so we can do calls, we can do chats. Today, that's limited between Teams and Skype for Business, but coming next year, Skype Consumer is going to be part of that as well.
Okay, well now, time for your first question in preventing guest access issues. What can administrators do to ensure that they don't have problems?
Oh, there's a lot of pieces of this. All right, let's see if we can tackle this a little bit. So I'm going to do a couple demos really quickly here. So for the first piece of this, for a standard out-of-the-box demo, we typically only need to turn on guest access for Teams. All the other dependent settings, they're already on by default, but let's walk through that. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go in, we're going to click down into the Teams Admin Center, down on the left-hand side. We're going to go down into our org-wide settings and down into guest access. So by turning this on, scrolling down, and then clicking on our Save button, now we're going to wait for this to update. This dialog box is getting ready to update where it's going to say we're going to wait from 2 to 24 hours. So you've got to go through that. It's going to take a little bit to get out there. In the Office Admin Center, we're going to go down into Security and Privacy. We're going to click on Sharing, where they're going to make sure that we've got this Let Users Add New Guests to the Organization. Now this is the same thing that's in AD External Collab. We're going to look at that as well. So we're going to flip over to Active Directory Admin Center. We're going into our users. We're going into user settings. And now this box down here will show us that members can invite. Okay, that needs to be set to yes. Next, we're moving over to O365 groups. Okay, we click on services and add-ins. We go down to Office O365 groups. We're going to click on this. This bottom checkbox needs to be checked in order for this to work. Lastly, but not least, we're going to drop over into our SharePoint Admin Center. So if you want your guests to have access to content, then you're basically going to want to select something other than the least permissive. Okay? So now we've gone through that, let's look at how we would restrict this at the group layer. Right? So I'm logging in real quick here. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and grab a template. We're grabbing an Azure AD settings template here, and we're going to modify this so that we can actually set the group access to off. Now what this is going to allow me to do is to prevent an individual team from having guests to be invited to it. We see this question a lot. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a couple settings here. I'm grabbing the allow to add guest. I'm setting that to false. I'm then applying that new set of settings over to that team. Then we're going to do a quick get to make sure that it took. We see the value is false. And if we want to set that back to true, it's a simple change of just doing a settings copy. We do it allow to add guest equal to true. We can see our group ID again matches up. We're adding in the entries that we've got here, and then we'll do another get, and now we see that value is true. So what this then allows us to do is it sets it so that now we as administrators at the group level, we can actually go through and prevent guests at each individual team and in an individual group. So a couple of notes for reference on this, right? So first, guest access in the team's org-wide settings. Second, either the O365 sharing interface or the Azure AD members interface. And you've got to put those members to can invite. Next, O365 groups, making sure that that second checkbox is turned on so that I've got access to be able to share things within the group. And then SharePoint sharing, so making sure that you have access enabled for external folks to be able to browse your SharePoint content. And then we also reviewed a lot of the data around just really quickly how to use variables to restrict at the team layer if we wanted to.
And Brian included a link there for documentation if you need to learn how to do that yourselves.
Yep. All right, you ready?
No.
So now that I've showed you how to turn all this on, and I've showed you all these key pieces that are involved, what if I completely throw logic out of the window and it doesn't work? So let's get a card here. How does that work?
Okay, so first I put together a slide for you, and this is a good handy reference slide for when we have issues. So the first is really simple. If guest access is turned off at the Teams layer, then when a user tries to add an external user, search external will not work. We'll say we could not find anybody with that email address. So it's just turned off, right? The second one, that second one is showing that a user is trying to invite someone external through Teams, and they're getting back, you are not authorized. That means that the tenant admin turned off members can invite. And there are some companies that do this by choice because they want to control and manage guest access creation. But the third one, I want you to take a look at that one. It's a little bit different. If you notice there, on that user identity on the bottom is actually a guest account. That guest account already exists in the tenant, and yet the user is not able to add that guest account to a team. And that is because the group-wide setting of letting users invite someone external to the org is off. That's a deal breaker, okay? If that's off, it won't work, even if the guest account already exists. So checking those settings is obviously key to troubleshooting. But there's something else that I talked about earlier, is that security ID mapping piece when a guest user gets an invite. And I want to quickly show you a very interesting tool that we have, which is auditing and log searching. So within the Security and Compliance Center, you can actually kick off an audit log search and see activities that have happened within your tenant. Now, I did a search, and I just invited a new user to the tenant, this Teams user. And you can actually see here in the activity, the invite to the user, the invite to the group, and actual Azure AD, and then more importantly, the service principal mapping back to that user's home tenant identity. And we can drill down into the details of that, and we can see that the user, in fact, accepted the invite, and that mapping back to that user's identity was successful. Customers will often have problems where that doesn't work, and audit logging will give you those really great details so you can kind of figure out what's going on behind the scenes and why that failed.
That's a lot of really good data. How many folks out here already have been into audit log before, actually used this before, seen some pieces?
A few of you, but so that's good. I'm glad I talked about it. Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so to recap, if you just turned it on, unfortunately, you do have to wait. Typically, it will complete within 2 hours. And then obviously you have to confirm all of those nitty-gritty settings.
Right.
There's a lot of them. That's tough. Corporate ID should not match a Microsoft account. We prevent users from doing it, but a security ID mapping back to a security principal would be really problematic if the person on the other side had those two accounts linked, a personal with a corporate. Which one do we tie to? And then audit log search, which we could use to investigate, but we could also use that to audit if we want to keep track of who's adding guests and when to our tenant. And then finally, woohoo, coming soon. Keep your eyes on the Office 365 Diagnostics. We understand this is painful to set up. So we'll have diagnostics that will help you drive to an answer in case things are not working in your tenant. How'd I do?
That's good. That's good. That's good. It's a lot of data.
Okay.
All right, so on to our next category, user provisioning.
Okay, that's a good one too, right? We see quite a few problems with user provisioning, so I'm glad we're covering that. So, Brian, for your next question, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
How can administrators be sure that their users are set up correctly so that when they sit down to use Teams for the first time, they're happy?
Ooh, that is a good one, Carolyn. So you mean I start troubleshooting things and then all of a sudden, automatically, they just kind of start working? Of course, it's never when I'm there, right? So we are working to improve the reliability and the timeliness of user provisioning, but we've got to make sure that those availables or settings are available on time. Admins need to allow time for this provisioning to occur. They've also got to make sure that their users have the right licenses, right? So if you're moving users into a Teams-only mode, we've got to make sure that they still have a Skype for Business Online license in order to have full functionality. Admins should not remove the Skype for Business license for their Teams-only users, or they're going to break some things. For our phone system folks, we want to make sure that all the required licenses are there, your calling licenses. Make sure that they've got phone system. Make sure that you've got communication credits set up if you need that. Also, if you're doing audio conferencing, make sure that that license is assigned. You've got to confirm the policy assignments for the user's dependent services. What I mean by that is, you've got to make sure that they have a license for Stream if your intention is to allow them to do recording of Teams meetings, right? You've got to think through that. Global policies. So you want to make sure that your global policies, that you've set those to be your global policy. It's your default. It should be matching your company standard. Then you're using explicit policies for those use cases that require that. Finally, do not upgrade your tenant to Teams only if users are on-prem with Skype for Business.
Oh, that's
pretty good?
Yeah, that was pretty good. That's a good list. Very important stuff to remember. Thanks.
All right. So I had a customer call with an issue a couple months ago, and they're really frustrated that the day after upgrading a group of users from Skype for Business with Collab to Teams only, that they had no chats and they had no calls in the Teams client, and their Skype for Business client was also not available for any of these features.
Do you mean this?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Has anybody encountered that? A couple of you, okay. Well, the good news is we have improved the story, and it's not days anymore. It's typically within an hour. But let me walk you through a scenario of a user upgrade and what that looks like so you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. So we have a user here, Fabrice, who's a Skype for Business with Collab user. You can see he's using Skype for Business for his chat, and he has no chats and calls in Teams. And he's going to get upgraded. And he's having a conversation. You could see there for a moment that cameo shot there. He was an interop conversation. So we're going to take his account. We're upgrading him from Skype for Business with Teams Collab to Teams only. And this way, he's going to use the Teams client from this point forward. So a minute after we applied that policy to him, he signs out of his Skype for Business client. And look at that, Skype for Business is informed and the client's no longer functioning. So he's really happy, he's all excited to get his new features in Teams, and he signs out of Teams and he signs back in, and then he calls me because he does not have chats and calls. And that's because the Teams client is going to take a little bit of time to get informed about this change due to some architecture and that's going on in the background. I just downloaded his logs here. And I downloaded that with the Control-Alt-Shift, and I did a search here for Office Integration First Run. And if you can see here on the right, the Teams client still sees Fabrice as a Skype for Business with Teams Collab user. And that is why that user does not have the features and functionality. Now, an hour went by. It's now an hour and 2 minutes, actually, from the time we upgraded. It was 8:41, and it's now 9:43. He got his full features and functionality within an hour. I download those logs again just to show you that in the logs with the Control-Alt-Shift 1. open the diagnostic logs. By the way, I'm using a tool here called Visual Studio Code, which I find really helpful for some cool searching capabilities. Again, I'm searching for that Office integration first run. And what we'll see now is that he's a Teams-only user. The Teams client is aware of his mode of operation, and therefore it behaves accordingly. And now you notice in the background here that previously Annie had a conversation with Fabrice, which was an interrupt, but now she has a native chat. I'm now taking advantage of some developer tools, and I'm navigated to teams.microsoft.com under Annie's account, and I've expanded the storage tab back there, and I'm drilling down to user principal name, and I'm looking up Fabrice's account. And take a look here. Annie is also seeing Fabrice's Teams only. So key point here, both the user who got upgraded his client needs to be informed he's the Teams only user, but everybody in the organization who needs to chat with the upgraded user also needs to be aware that that user is a Teams only user. Now, I went through this really rapidly because we're trying to cover a lot, but you'll have this deck afterwards. So you have two key tools here to look at both sides of that conversation and to see how the Teams client is being informed of both the user state as well as the recipient state.
That's good stuff.
Okay, so once again to recap, and thank you. Changes will update, typically within an hour. We can confirm the settings both in Skype for Business Online through PowerShell that we actually upgraded the user. And then we can confirm settings in Teams through the diagnostic logs, or as I showed you, HTTPS trace if we want to look at the recipient side. Recipient chat threads, and this is really good news, the recipient chat thread now will upgrade. When a user is upgraded to Teams only, Annie saw that change the same time Fabrice did. It's an hour. Very important point, that improvement right now only exists when users are being upgraded to Teams. For other modes, that upgrade is more to 24 to 36 hours still. Improvements to come, but at least the Teams upgrade, it's immediate, or fairly immediate.
Man, Carolyn, you are absolutely rocking it. So I know you think that this deck is stacked, so why don't we do a little bonus question right about here?
Uh-oh.
So I noticed in the Teams logs, it's really not clear to me what policies the clients are actually using. So how can I, as an admin, see what policy that the client is actually seeing?
That's a really great question. We are driving improvements there, but what we can do today is avail ourselves again of an HTTPS trace. So what I whizzed through before, let me hit that up again. So in this case, I'm using developer tools in the Edge browser. You can do that through an F12 or drill down to the developer tools. Here I'm doing a network trace, and I'm logging into teams.microsoft.com. I'm letting the Teams client fully load within that browser instance, and then I'm going to search here on the right for tenant settings v2. This is saved in the notes for you, so you don't have to memorize it. And I'm going to pull back the search results for that. And then when it comes on the right here, it's kind of a blob of data, but if you hit pretty text, it's prettify JSON formatting that text, you'll actually see here that you can see all the details of that client. So if you're familiar with Skype for Business bootstrapping and we're looking at the 200 response back from the service, this is similar here. We're getting a 200 response back from our service with all the details that the client's consuming that informs the client on how to behave. And we can also drill to other settings on the left, and you can see here the full normalization dial pad. We can see the user's an online mailbox user, and we can even see their call park policy. So if you haven't done this, do it on your own client where you're absolutely positively sure of what those settings are, and you can see and investigate for yourself how you can find these settings. Again, improvements coming, but for now, at least you have a methodology for finding out this information. So once again, to recap, HTTPS trace using F12 with developer tools, either in Edge or Chrome browser. Search on the network trace for tenant settings v2. Click on the little pretty text so that you get formatted JSON. And then look at your 200 OK responses to the user aggregated settings that are returned. How'd I do?
Man, I thought that was going to be easy. It's good stuff, though. Really, really good stuff.
OK, well, it's your turn now.
All right.
You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, so how can administrators, here's a good one, ears on, how can administrators be sure that users who have PSTN calling capabilities actually get a dial pad in their Teams client?
Well, believe it or not, this is still probably one of our #1 support issues. So there's a couple of pieces to this. First, one-on-one calling's got to be enabled. Right? If we're blocking this, then they're not going to be able to see it. Second, their Skype for Business account's got to be online. Third, enterprise voice has to be enabled online for that user. And we got to have a way to route this call, right? So if the voice policy is equal to business voice, then that means that Microsoft's going to handle the routing for you. But if the voice policy is equal to hybrid voice, then that means that the customer has to provide the online voice routing policy for the user. We got to know how to get that there. It's pretty easy, right?
Yep.
All right. So once again, and you're going to see a trend here, but if I don't follow any of this guidance, or maybe I just missed something, how does an admin find out what's going on, and how can I troubleshoot this?
That's a good question. So let me demo that quick. Okay, so Annie was upgraded to Teams Direct Routing for calling, and she has no dial pad. She's still trying to make a call. She's very persistent. She thinks she can just punch in a number and it'll work, but of course it won't. So let's take a look at Annie's logs. Again, Control-Alt-Shift-1, downloading the logs, opening up in my favorite editor, Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to search, in this case, on calling support service. That's our service that's going to pull back Annie's settings and make a determination, should I show a dial pad? Will a call be successful for Annie if I do show that dial pad? And so when we're looking at the results here, we want to look at the line for the calculation for PST on calling aloud. And starting from the left to right, against Brian's list, we see that the user one-to-one calling's allowed. The user is an online user, so check, check, good, good. But moving further to the right here, we'll actually see some problems coming up. The user's not a business voice user, and is BYOT, code name for direct routing, bring your own trunk, is false. So the user is a hybrid voice user, but has not been provided an online voice routing policy, hence we don't know how to route the call. So I'm confirming that, and I pull back her settings in Skype for Business Online, and this was truly a tenant admin miss. She wasn't assigned a voice routing policy. We don't know how to route the call. We're not going to show the dial pad if the user's not actually going to have a successful PSTN calling capability. Similar to Skype for Business, if AV enabled was false, we wouldn't show a dial pad. A few more complexities here in the Teams client than there were in Skype for Business, especially with direct routing. So to recap, we can troubleshoot these issues by using Control-Alt-Shift-1, a little bit of finger twister, and then we can open the file and search for calling support service. But better yet, coming soon, to a support center near you, we're going to be providing you PSTN calling diagnostics so that you can find out why a particular user in your tenant is not having the right calling experience. Yeah, thank you. For your reference, until we have that in place, it's just a handy-dandy slide. I'm not going to read it, obviously. This is just a takeaway for you if some of those settings aren't right, what the potential problems are, and where you may investigate and resolve those.
All right, are we ready for our next round of questions for external access?
Good category. This is good because you may have seen a message center post in your tenant that native federation is coming soon. So we want to cover a couple of points about that. All right, so it's your turn.
All right.
What do administrators need to do to be sure that their users are successful with external access?
Ooh, so first I want to answer with my favorite IT answer. It depends.
Okay, can you elaborate on that?
Well, we've got to go through a bunch of different things to make sure that federation is set up correctly. Why don't we look through some of that really quick? So first piece of this is that we've got to make sure that the tenant admin has everything configured directly for external access. So we're going to go down here. We're going to click into org-wide settings. We're going to click under external access here. Now what we're looking for is making sure that this is turned on. We're also looking at this domain list to make sure what's listed in here. So once the domain is added in here, it's going to be either a block list or an allow list. So the other piece of this is that you've also got to make sure that you have those lists matching up here in your SRV records. So in order for you to have federation access, we need SRV. Those things have to be there.
Right. That's really important because people who are new to Teams would not necessarily know that. For federation to work between Teams and Skype for Business, those SRV records are still required. But Brian, I have a question. What happens if a customer has Skype for Business on-prem and online?
Well, no big deal. Right? We've just got to make sure that both of our online and our on-prem external access domain lists match. That way everything stays same.
That doesn't sound too hard.
It's not too bad. All right, so quick recap there. External access, we want to make sure that external access permissions are configured in the Teams Admin Center. Do not forget about the DNS SRV records. You have to have those. They need to match. And then lastly, if we're in hybrid with Skype for Business Online, we want to make sure that our allow and our block list match each other. You don't want to be moving people up and having them have a different experience than they had on-prem. All right, so next question for you. This is getting to be a trend, but what if I did all this and it didn't work? Because surely me, as the admin, I'm not going to mess this up, right? So what can an administrator do to troubleshoot this?
Okay, well, before I get into actual troubleshooting, because we're especially moving into this new methodology of native federated chat, I want to walk through a couple of scenarios so that you can understand what the different chat experiences are in external chat, depending upon user states, right? Where their accounts are homed and what type of mode they have in Teams, coexistence mode. So let's kick this off here. Brian Wolford's upgraded to Teams here. Woohoo! And he's having an external conversation with a user who's is not upgraded to Teams. So we can see this user is actually using Skype for Business for their chat here. And so that is going to be a different experience. That's going to route through Skype for Business. This is why we need those SRV records. Right? So that's important. So I'm downloading the diagnostic logs for Brian here, and we want to take a look at why did Teams decide that this was not going to be a native thread, right? Because that's important for you to understand this as administrators. So if we look here, we can actually see that Brian is an upgraded Teams only user, right? So that's good. So he's able to do it. And now we're getting the user chat mode for the other person. And we look here, the other person's a Skype for Business with Teams collab user. So if you look at these diagnostic logs and you're curious, why was that not a native chat? Look at the sender, look at the receiver. Now Brian's having a conversation with the Teams user and he's doing a happy dance because both sides of both users involved in this conversation are Teams only users. So once again, let's take a look at the log. We look at the user chat mode for the recipient. So go ahead and download those logs, did a search for user chat mode, and you can see here that that recipient is Teams only, okay? So Teams only, to Teams only gets you native, okay? That's the only combination that gets you native. Both users need to be homed online with Teams only. And just to drill that down a little bit again, remember that Teams user was a Teams only user, but this other user here is getting an interop experience. She's getting an interop experience because she's not a Teams-only user, okay? So we know that other recipient was, but the sender's not. Does that make sense? Okay, so to troubleshoot external access, we first need to understand the routing logic. I know I went through it quickly, but you can refer to the slides afterwards. Teams only to Teams only gets you native. Teams only to anything other than Teams only gets you an interop chat that rides the rail of Skype for Business online routing, okay? And second, you need to confirm those tenant settings that Brian pointed out, especially we want to be sure external access is enabled and we want to be sure that our allow domain lists match our, the types of communications we want to have. And we need to have those DNS server records unless we're only talking to people who've upgraded to Teams. Third, users must be online with Skype for Business to use Federation and Teams. If they are not online, they cannot use Teams at all for federated conversations. If they try to search for someone external to their org, that search will not be successful. And then I wanted to show you one more thing here, that when we switch threads, so let's say Brian just upgraded to Teams, and I was already upgraded to Teams. My previous conversation with him was an interop conversation. Then when I go to talk to Brian again, after he's been upgraded, my Teams client is aware of that fact. I will get a notification that says an organizational change has, you have to switch conversations due to this org change. And that can be from Teams native back to interop, from interop to native. The pre-existing thread stays for readability, but it's locked and you're directed to the new thread. Make sense? And I just showed you a little screenshot there of what the difference is and what it looks like. Both of those federated conversations show external, but if it's an interop, it'll have a little S. That doesn't necessarily mean the person's a Skype user. It means that the conversation routed through Skype because they're not a Teams-only user.
Makes sense. That's good stuff. All right, so, man.
We're getting to the closing minutes.
That was a sprint right there. All right, so let's go into last category real quick. So pull me one more.
Last chance.
All right.
I hope you've been keeping count.
I got this.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
I'm ready.
Name your top tools for how to prevent problems with Teams.
All right, I got a couple here. So first, I got to plug Fast Track, right? We're here to make sure that your M365 enablement goes smoothly. Secondly, Success with Teams website. This is my #1 landing spot. I got you a short URL over here, the SWT URL. This is where I go when I'm looking for documentation. This is my entry point into all of our documents around that. And the third piece of this is the Coffee in the Cloud series of videos. The more you learn about the product, the better that you'll be prepared to prevent the issues. All right, you ready? Last time.
Okay, I'm ready.
So what tools can you recommend for administrators to troubleshoot Teams?
Good question. We're trying to drive more and more of that to online with telemetry. So we've covered a few reporting tools with you today. There's many more, and there's many more to come. If you've been over at at Expo today, hopefully you got to drive through some of the new tools that have come to the Teams Admin Center. PSTN usage reports now includes Diagnostics for direct routing calls, of course the direct routing dashboard, the support diagnostics I was talking about, the audit logs, which was apparently new to a lot of you. Turn that on if it's not on in your security and compliance. If you do have to drill down under the covers, we've got the Teams Diagnostics with that happy Control-Alt-Shift-1 if you're in Windows, Command-Option-Shift-1 if you're on a Mac, and then we can also use an HTTPS trace.
Fantastic. It's lots and lots of stuff there. All right, so now it's time to really quickly pick a winner. So we're going to do this just by gauged on applause here. So,
can we hear a shout out for Team Prevent?
All right, and how about Team Troubleshoot over here? All right. Honestly, everyone here is a winner just for attending this session.
Yes.
So
Thank you for
if this was fun for you, as it was for us, please make sure that you go through and do your survey here because we want to have another one of these battles in the future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you very much.